Much of fiction poses the issue surrounding morality. What is right? What is wrong? Does it even exist during times of global pressure? In post-apocalyptic fiction, morality becomes overshadowed by the need to survive. The Last of Us is the latest game by critically acclaimed development team Naughty Dog, under the direction of Neil Druckmann and Bruce Straley. Taking place 20 years after the world is torn apart by a natural parasitic fungus known as cordyceps, players take on the role of Joel as he escorts a young 14-year-old girl named Ellie across America to a militia group called the Fireflies. Focusing on a father-daughter relationship that grows over the course of an in-game year, The Last of Us allows players to discover how the world copes with the downfall of humanity, both figuratively and literally. The government is trying to maintain order through the harshest methods of martial law, while also trying to bat off the Fireflies, who believe they hold the key to saving mankind. The Hunters are a faction of survivors who use the most extreme measures to stay alive, which goes as far as to outright ambush, raid, and murder men, women, and children they call tourists. And even some people go it alone, such as Bill, a deeply troubled man who managed to defend an entire town and keep it to himself. This video will focus on what I consider to be one of the most polarizing endings to a game I've seen in years, and I mean that in a good way. This ending has lingered with me for days after completing it, and after gathering my thoughts, I've come to my own conclusion as to how I interpret the ending. This is my own subjective take on the ending, so bear in mind that this may conflict with the opinions of others. Compared to my other game evaluations, there is no direct hypothesis to give to this analysis. Instead, this video will be broken into two questions generated from the ending that make me question both Joel's morality and his ambiguous actions. Why did Joel save Ellie, and why did Joel later lie to Ellie? To be clear, I'll stress this one more time. This is a personal view of The Last of Us's ending, as it's open to interpretation as to how you feel about Joel's actions. To say Joel saved Ellie because he became close to her isn't enough reason for him to justify destroying mankind's possibility of a future. Instead, it's evident that Joel sees Ellie as a reincarnation of his daughter Sarah. The most significant part of Joel's life prior to the outbreak was his daughter, as displayed prominently in the game's opening. His pressure at work was all for the sake of his daughter, who despite becoming alienated from him still loves him as much as he loves her. Sarah's death is thus a characterization of Joel's bleak outlook on the current state of the world. It's not just the loss of a close relation that upsets him, it's the guilt of this loss that has continued to haunt his dreams 20 years on. It's all related to the theme of survivor's guilt. It's only after coming into contact with Tommy again is Sarah really mentioned, and it isn't until this moment that Joel becomes much closer to Ellie. A prominent example of the Ellie-Sarah connection is when Joel finds Ellie in a girl's bedroom at an abandoned house that is reminiscent of Joel's before the outbreak. The accusation that Joel wants to get rid of Ellie could have been due to the fact that Joel is trying to keep Sarah out of his mind, and Ellie is an obvious indicator of his loss. By passing her on to Tommy, it alleviates Joel's fear that he might get Ellie killed.
What are you so afraid of? That I'm gonna end up like Sam? I can't get infected. I can take care of myself.
How many close calls have we had?
Well, we seem to be doing all right so far.
And now you'll be doing even better with Tommy.
I'm not her, you know.
What?
Maria told me about Sarah.
Ellie?
You are treading on some mighty thin ice here.
The responsibility for Ellie is something Joel feels he can't do due to his supposed failure to protect Sarah. Joel clearly thinks that Tommy is a better guardian because it was largely Tommy who helped Joel and Sarah get out of town. It's this line that sums up a lot of what's going on in Joel's head.
You're right. You're not my daughter. And I sure as hell ain't your dad.
This will become more significant later in this analysis, but I'll flag this up now because it relates to the point that Joel continually relates Ellie to Sarah, but at the same time is attempting to block this thought from his existence. By the time the duo reach Salt Lake City, Joel remarks that he will teach Ellie to swim and play guitar, pastimes that clearly relate to Sarah as evident by the guitar in the house. When Ellie returns the photo of Sarah to Joel, he comments that you can never escape your past, and this evidently is true. When Joel finally manages to save Ellie from surgery, the escape sequence mirrors the opening of the game. It has a dreamlike quality to it, as though Joel was replaying the events of the evening of Sarah's death, and as we'll see, Joel is trying to reconstruct this as an alternative memory as though Sarah did survive. Joel saved Ellie because he didn't want to lose another daughter. Joel metaphorically and technically adopted Ellie, hence his need to save her was not necessarily redemption, rather than a need to get his daughter back. Returning to Tommy's group to Joel means that everything goes back to the way it was. Joel in many ways is on the verge of complete breakdown. The way it looks is that Joel bottled up his past for 20 years, and thus has alienated himself from everyone in the same way he felt alienated from his daughter. In Joel's mind, Ellie replaces Sarah. While that sounds negative, it's clear that Joel was desperate for emotional stability, and Tess clearly couldn't provide that support due to her aggressive demeanour. Joel masks his sensitivity through a cold personality, while his violent acts release his tension of guilt. The ending relieves Joel from guilt, but inadvertently passes that guilt on to Ellie. The ambiguity of the ending comes from Joel's lie to Ellie, and this is where everything comes together. Psychologically speaking, it's clear from this analysis so far that Joel is emotionally unstable. He clearly isn't mentally fit because of the world he lives in, and his actions are only justified by his need to grasp on to a shred of hope. Survival is the reason given to Joel's violence, but in context to the extent of his actions, he is a murderer in the technical sense. Joel's psyche surprises me because he seems like he has fallen so deep that he could have taken his own life. But from the way in which he keeps going, it appears that he was waiting for a moment of hope.
You keep finding something to fight for.
His reaction to Henry's suicide following Sam's death was the same as his daughter's death. He's attempting to block it out. As David says, everything happens for a reason, and Joel's actions happen for the reason of saving his own life psychologically. Without Ellie, Tess, or Tommy, Joel has nothing to go back for. Many see Joel as being selfish, and from what I've said, that is largely the case, but not within the modern definition. In other words, selfishness in this world isn't based on greed or inconsideration. It's based on the need to protect yourself both physically and psychologically. Is Joel really at fault for doing what a parent would do in a situation like this? He's risking his own life to save his adopted daughter, so that doesn't make him selfish to the full degree. You can look at Joel's actions in two distinct ways. He's the bad guy for destroying humanity's only chance of a future, or his actions are justified by caring for the one he loves. It has nothing to do with heroics, it's a very humanized choice. In one of the optional conversations found following the ambush, Sage Joel explained that innocent people were shot by the military as to sacrifice the few to save the many. The military did this because it's their job to protect citizens, but Joel is just an everyday man, and thus his decision is not influenced by being a hero. This is not a Hollywood ending. As a veteran of this world, he's been on both sides. He has killed numerous amounts of people to survive and has become so immersed in what the world has become. It's the journey throughout the game that describes this. We see how society continues to operate following the outbreak. The military are doing their best to keep order and regulate the percentage of the population still remaining. The Hunters and David's group are doing what they can do to sustain their factions, which don't house the safety of walls and systematic leadership. The Sewer chapter shows that one man even created a society only for it to fall apart after an infection. Tommy and Maria are creating a self-sustainable and efficient community with the benefits of natural resources. The Fireflies are grasping at straws to create a vaccine that is unclear whether it will indeed work, considering earlier attempts failed. Even Bill managed to create his own isolated society using awkward defenses to house an entire town to himself. When you look at it, society found a way to regulate itself, and Joel clearly saw this. As someone who has seen how the world coped with the intense pressure of a natural disease, will a vaccine even make much difference? His psychological state justifies the belief that really there is nothing that experimenting on Ellie will do to benefit humanity. The Fireflies have the future of mankind at their heart, which is respectable, but it doesn't necessarily translate into a better future. From a practical standpoint, a vaccine would create further chaos. Hunters rejected the government and the government rejected the Fireflies, so bringing these groups together would just result in more violence. David's group allegedly resorted to cannibalism, so that would create further social issues for them. The fact of the matter is, these groups have found a way to regrow the world in their own way. Why change that? I personally don't agree with the Fireflies' agenda. I like that they're striving for humanity, but in my interpretation, they are going the wrong way about it, and come off as both condescending and ignorant. They started a war with the government, but the government didn't do anything wrong. The government took extreme measures of martial law, such as the immediate penalty of death, to help extinguish the threat of infection. But that's completely understandable given that quarantine zones are constantly taken over due to infection and disorder. Life is tough on everyone, and the quarantine zones are largely no different from anywhere else outside the walls. If anything, the Fireflies are causing more problems. Joel sees Tommy and Maria's group as the best way for society to move on. They managed to restore electricity using natural resources, and they were even able to grow crops again. The return to Tommy's at the end shows that Joel saw it as the only viable group to go back to, and when honestly evaluating each group, Tommy's appears to be the only one with a positive outcome. They may have to defend themselves, but even with a vaccine, there is infected still out there. Returning to Joel's mental state, there are several signs that give away his instability. Firstly, David describes Joel as a crazy man, which is interesting because killing hunters and infected is accepted due to the threat they create, but upon arrival to the university, the human threats are unidentified. Joel killed them with only the justification that he and Ellie were shot at, with no context given, with one of them even claiming that Joel murdered his friends. While the group did shoot on sight, it could be argued that they assumed Joel and Ellie were infected given that the infected inhibited the area. Joel never attempts to talk his way around a single group in the story, so this mental decline comes from years of desperation as a survivor. The game is largely influenced by Cormac McCarthy's The Road, which sees an ambiguous theme of survival insanity. In The Road, the boy is adopted by another family who claim that his father was both mentally and physically ill. There is nothing to say that Joel isn't actually insane. In fact, most of the characters aren't mentally healthy either. Marlene's logs in the hospital show she clearly has insomnia and is becoming increasingly paranoid. She constantly goes on about Ellie's deceased mother Anna, suggesting the same guilt as Joel but having cracked under the pressure. It poses the question as to whether anyone is mentally fit to decide humanity's future. Bill is an interesting example of mental health in the game due to the messages found in his town. With the absence of his partner comes signs of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. He has abnormal behaviour, antisocial interaction, his messages to himself show he's becoming delusional, and Ellie even highlights that he talks to himself. I'm no psychologist, but one could argue he has a personality disorder due to the lack of human communication he has.
And get the fuck out of my town.
If there's one thing The Last of Us does differently from other post-apocalyptic fiction is the psychology of its characters. Fear, guilt, panic and so on are only small elements to what the characters are really suffering from. The emphasis by the developers that this is not a zombie game is highlighted by how the infection is all related to the brain. Cordyceps takes control of the brain and commands its host to infect others as long as the host is still got functional aspects of being human, such as hydration and blood flow. This psychology gives the game deeper meaning. We rarely see the characters eat, sleep or drink, which suggests sleep deprivation and dehydration, preventing the characters from functioning normally. This is a bit of a stretch, but one could even go as far as to pose the question, do the infected function better than the humans? The watch is a symbol of Joel's mental state. While it serves as a symbol of Sarah, The fact that it's broken suggests that there is no understanding of time in the world. The characters clearly have no knowledge of the time of day or what day of the week it is. The constant shift from season to season shows that time passes without appropriate understanding, suggesting that Joel and Ellie are disoriented in their journey. Each location is even accentuated as the duo makes their way from Boston to Lincoln to Pittsburgh and so on. The only pressure on time comes from when Joel needs to save Ellie.
Where?
Top floor, the far end.
So why did Joel lie to Ellie? While it was likely to be as a way to keep Ellie on his side, I see it as Joel's way to try and forget the journey ever happened. Taking into account the lack of pressure on time, the death of Tess, and Joel's mental issues, he's trying to make it seem as though things are back to the way they were. He becomes close to Tommy again, he's found a prospering society, and most of all, Joel is free to be with his daughter again. In many stories, the survival of both characters is a relief. Joel and Ellie become close and they return to a safe home to be with Tommy and his family. Taking the beautiful visuals out of the equation, we have to realize that there is no black or white in this world, only grey. The prolonged shot of Ellie looking into Joel's eyes shows hope that Ellie may have been aware that Joel was lying due to her knowledge of his ways, but played along with it because of her love for her new father, as also evident by her quick and simple response to Joel's answer. That said, it could simply be that she's being fooled. Joel's mental health is worrying, but the bright side is evident now that he no longer has to bear the burden of fearing the world for what it's become. From what it seems, nothing would have really changed significantly had a vaccine been created, only that Joel and Ellie would not be where we last see them.
Sarah. Move your hands, babe. I know, baby, I know. God. Listen to me, I know this hurts, baby. You're gonna be okay, baby. Stay with me.
What do you mean for this?
Show it to me.
Once upon a time,
Oh, Christ.
I had somebody that I cared about. And in this world, that sort of shit's good for one thing: getting you killed.
Whether you see the ending as good or bad, Joel's ignorance and bias towards the Fireflies stopped him from losing his only chance of hope. This is a world where you look after yourself. When a character such as Joel or Henry helps someone else, it shows that humanity is still there. Joel doesn't see the world as worth saving because the world doesn't need saving. It found a way to look after itself. Very few games have managed to ever make me feel this emotionally connected with both the characters and the story. The Last of Us is truly one of the defining games of this generation and arguably of all time. The empathy generated from the narrative towards Joel makes the ending all the more optimistic because the world will move on and continue to find new ways to survive. Joel's actions are very questionable, but the profound challenge of finding hope in a game that shows beauty in the darkest times is something very little fiction has been able to execute as eloquently as The Last of Us. The Cordyceps becomes a metaphor for how humanity responds to drastic changes and what individualism really means to society. Everything was natural. It wasn't encouraged, it wasn't forced, it just happened. Nature took its course and humanity should not try to control it. The world is as it is because, as Joel says, maybe it was meant to be.